wind carried dust through the hollow, whispering through broken fence posts and dry mesquite, as if trying to tell a secret no one dared to hear. The Jensen Ranch sat crouched on the edge of the canyon, like it had something to be ashamed of. It was the kind of place folks passed on their way to somewhere better. A stretch of pale grass, a leaning barn, and a house more gray than white, paint long stripped by sun and time. Clara Jensen stood on the porch with her hands at her sides, not clenched, not trembling, just still. Her husband, Thomas, had packed his satchel and saddlebag that morning with the quiet efficiency of a man cleaning a wound. He didn't meet her eyes as he cinched the leather straps across his bay horse's back. She didn't offer to help, and he didn't expect her to. When he finally spoke, it was with that low, hollow tone he used when talking to broken cattle or cracked wagon wheels. "I can't keep living with a ghost, Clara." She blinked slowly, the only reaction she allowed. "I gave it time," he said, mounting. "Years of it, but you're empty, and I can't build nothing on emptiness." He tugged the reins and rode off without looking back. The sound of hooves faded into the canyon, swallowed like so many things out here. Rain, laughter, children's voices. Clara didn't cry. She didn't move for a long time, watching the dirt path where he vanished. The boards beneath her bare feet creaked when she finally turned and stepped back into the house. Inside, the silence was thick and settled. Dust danced in the light slicing through warped window frames. The kettle hadn't been boiled that morning. The table still had the same nick in it from when Thomas had slammed his hand down last fall. The rocking chair by the hearth was hers. She had sanded it herself years ago, but she couldn't bring herself to sit in it now. The house didn't feel emptier. It just felt honest. She spent the next few days in measured rhythm. Feed the chickens. Patch the roof. Boil beans and cornbread. Her hands moved with the habit of a woman who'd long ago stopped waiting for someone to thank her. In town, whispers sprouted like weeds. Clara Jensen, left alone. No children. No man. She always was a little too quiet, too still. Folks liked a woman who laughed, who fluttered around like spring finches, not one who walked like the wind might bow to let her pass. On the third day, she rode her mule into Ash Hollow for flour and nails. The general store clerk, a widow named Eustace Monroe, gave her a glance that hovered on pity before it slid away. "You hear about the orphan wagon?" he asked, trying to fill the silence. She hadn't. "Came through 2 nights ago. Sheriff said it was headed to a home in Colorado, but the escort got ambushed. Bandits or deserters, nobody's sure. They limped into town with what was left, a handful of kids, no more than 8 of them. Lost 2 adults along the way. Town can't keep him." Clara didn't reply. She finished her purchase, packed the goods into her saddlebag, and walked past the saloon, past the church, past the schoolhouse where children's laughter used to echo like birdsong. Outside the old meeting hall, she stopped. The children sat in the shade of the wall, knees drawn up, faces smudged with dust and grief. No one watched them. No one claimed them. One girl, maybe 10, stared straight at Clara, with eyes dark as canyon stone. She didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't ask for anything. The others were asleep or pretending to be. Their skin varied, pale, freckled, brown, sun-darkened. Their clothes hung loose, ill-fitting or torn. They didn't belong to any one story. They looked like scattered pages from many. Clara didn't speak to them, not yet. She simply stood, then nodded once and walked away. That night, the wind pushed harder against the ranch house, but Clara didn't bar the windows. She left them open, let the cool air sweep the rooms. She lit a lantern and took down a cracked ledger from the high shelf. It still held names she and Thomas had once dreamed up, names for children who never came. She crossed them out, page by page. In the morning, she rode back into town with 2 empty grain sacks, a tin of soap, and 3 loaves of cornbread wrapped in a clean cloth. By noon, the children were riding back with her, clinging to the sides of the mule cart and staring in stunned silence at the path ahead. She didn't ask them their names. Not yet. She didn't give them hers either. But when one of the smallest, a boy with a bandaged foot and eyes like wet clay, whispered, "Where are we going?" she only said, "Home." The canyon wind rose behind them, carrying the scent of mesquite and the faint promise of rain. Something old had broken, but something else had begun to grow in its place. The wagon wheels groaned under the weight of 8 lives as Clara guided the cart up the shallow rise toward the old Jensen ranch. The children sat quietly, their small hands gripping the wooden slats, their eyes darting across the open land like prey unsure of safety. Dust rose in soft plumes behind them, curling into the sky like unanswered prayers. The house appeared over the ridge, plain, battered, but upright. Its porch sagged like a tired spine, and the windmill turned lazily beside the barn. A rooster crowed somewhere, late and uncertain. Clara halted the mule and looked back. "We're here." The children stared. Not one moved. "I can't carry you all," she added, voice flat. The eldest, a boy of maybe 12 with a sharp jaw and arms too thin for his sleeves, was the first to climb down. The others followed, reluctant but obedient, shoes scraping gravel, some barefoot altogether. Inside, the house was cooler than the sun-bleached world outside. Clara had cleaned the night before, sweeping out old hay and setting down wool blankets in what used to be the pantry and spare storage. There weren't enough beds, but there was space, and right now, space was sanctuary. She pointed. "That's for sleep. That's the kitchen. Don't wander past the barn. There's a spring west of the coop. You drink only from there." No one answered. The mute weight of their presence filled the house like a second wind. Clara turned to the stove and lit a fire beneath the pot she had set that morning. Later, when bowls of beans and flour biscuits were passed around, one child finally spoke. A girl with tangled braids and a hollow look in her eye. "What's your name?" Clara met her gaze. "Clara Jensen." The girl nodded slowly. "I'm Willa." One by one, the others followed, as if summoned. "Bo," said the oldest boy. "Annie and Caleb," twins with matching green eyes. "Isaiah," muttered a pale, freckled boy who never looked up from his food. The smallest, still sucking a thumb, was introduced by Willa. "That's Ruthie. She don't talk much." The last two came later, one after dinner, the other not until morning. A Cherokee girl with eyes sharp as river glass said her name was Nokos, which meant bear in her language. She never elaborated. The final boy didn't speak at all, not even to give his name. Clara found him early the next day curled beneath the porch with a stick in his hand, drawing circles in the dirt. "You got a name?" she asked, kneeling. He didn't respond. "All right," she said, brushing her hands on her apron. "You'll be Trace, till you say different." He blinked once. She took that as agreement. Days fell into rhythm. Clara rose before dawn, and the children soon followed, sensing that whatever storm had flung them here, it was now behind them. She set chores without scolding and gave orders without raising her voice. Willa took quickly to the kitchen, stirring dough and boiling beans. Caleb liked tools and spent hours hammering nails into scrap wood with more enthusiasm than skill. Annie sang when no one was looking. Nokos moved like a shadow, first in silence, then with purpose, always watching the land. Bo patrolled the fence lines without being told, eyes scanning the horizon. Trace remained silent, but every evening, he lined up small stones outside the door in perfect rows, as if trying to create order out of chaos. Clara didn't try to mother them. She cooked, taught, cleaned, and assigned. She told stories only once the sun had fallen and plates were scraped clean. Some were about cows, others about constellations. The children listened not because she insisted, but because the house, bare though it was, sounded fuller with her voice in it. Yet, not all sounds were welcome. One morning, as Clara chopped wood behind the barn, Bo ran to her, his breath ragged. "Smoke," he said, pointing west, rising past the bluff. "Big." She dropped the axe and climbed a ridge behind the barn. There, curling into the bright morning sky, was a plume of dark smoke, heavy, unnatural. Not a cook fire, not lightning fire. She knew the land too well. That was a structure burning. "Which ranch?" she asked quietly. Bo's lips pressed into a line. "Dunno, but the Thompsons live that way." The Thompsons, an older couple with no family and too much land for two. Clara watched the smoke until the wind carried it apart. Her gut turned cold. That night, she gathered the children around the kitchen table. The lantern swayed slightly from the rafter hook as if uneasy with the weight in the room. "There's something you need to know," she began. "That fire today wasn't an accident." She paused. "Men have been riding these canyons. Bad ones. The kind who take what they want. You see strangers. You don't talk. You don't wave. You come straight back here and find me. Understand?" Eyes widened, but none of them cried. Clara's voice stayed steady. "We'll be ready." Willa finally asked the question in everyone's throat. "Will they come here?" "Maybe," Clara answered. "But I've lived on this land a long time, and it doesn't belong to them." The children exchanged glances, and for the first time since arriving, they looked not like refugees, but like a small, rough family learning the shape of a shared burden. That night, Clara sat alone on the porch, her buffalo rifle across her lap, not for show, but for memory. It had once belonged to her mother, the only person who had ever called her strong before the world decided otherwise. Clara traced her thumb along the worn wood, thinking of the children curled on blankets inside, of the house no longer echoing with emptiness, but filled with breath, footsteps, and the beginning of new names. A coyote howled in the distance. She didn't flinch. By morning, the smoke was gone, but the scent of trouble remained, faint as old blood and dry earth. Thunder didn't always come with rain. Sometimes it came with hooves, with the low, distant rumble of men moving fast, reckless, without mercy. Clara heard it before she saw the dust, a sickening tremble in the ground that every rancher came to recognize. Trouble. Bo was the first to spot the riders. "6 of 'em," he said, crouched on the barn roof with Caleb's spyglass. "One's got a red bandana. They're headed east, slow-like." Clara looked westward toward the hills that once held the Thompson place. Only blackened posts remained now, charred into the horizon like broken teeth. "They're watching the land," she said. "Not passing through. Hunting." "Us?" Caleb asked. "No," Clara said. "Not yet. But if we look like prey, we will be." Inside the house, she cleared the kitchen table and rolled out a map hand-drawn decades earlier by her father, before barbed wire divided ranchers and before Clara traded her old name for a husband's. She pointed. "Here's us. This ridge here, Hawks Hollow, has a narrow pass, too tight for a full gang to come through fast." Annie leaned in. "We could set traps there." Clara nodded. "If they come, we'll buy time, not by fighting head-on, but by knowing the land better than they do." The plan took shape like stitches in a quilt. Caleb and Annie would lead efforts on tripwire and noisemakers made of scrap iron and dry brush. Nokos would lay false trails, drawing the gang deeper into the narrow gullies and away from the house. Bo insisted on watching from the ridge. He knew the stars and would use them to track movement at night. Clara handed Isaiah a small slate board. "Mark every time they circle near. No guesswork. If I don't know what they know, we lose." She didn't ask if they were scared. They all were. That didn't matter now. That night, Clara lit no lanterns. The house stayed dark, quiet, invisible. But she didn't sleep. She sat on the porch again, rifle balanced across her knees. Her mind wandered to her mother's voice, calm and sure, even when the men laughed at a woman who could outshoot them all. "You only shoot when the silence after is worth it," she'd said once. In the gray hours before dawn, Clara saddled her mule and rode to town. Not to beg for help. She knew better, but to lay cards on the table. Sheriff Daly met her outside the jail, boots caked in dust, eyes shadowed from sleeplessness. "You heard about the Thompsons?" he asked. "I saw the smoke." He hesitated. "Same gang that took the Brooks boy last spring. No laws coming out this far. Nearest marshal's in Santa Rosa. Weeks out." Clara didn't flinch. "I don't need a badge. I need a message passed." Daly raised an eyebrow. "I've got children on my land. Orphans. Survivors. You remember what that means." His jaw tightened. He'd been a foundling himself, one of the railroad brats raised by miners and grit. "What message?" "If I fall," she said, "don't let them disappear." He nodded. "You'll hold the ranch." "I'll hold it," she said. She turned to leave, then paused. "You ever seen a buffalo rifle in hands that don't shake?" His eyes flicked to her saddle. I have now. Back at the ranch, the air hung heavy. Nokos had returned with thorns in her skirt and news in her eyes. They scouted the ridge, she said softly. One broke off. He watched from the west hill. I was upwind. Clara exhaled slowly. The gang wasn't waiting. They were plotting. She gathered the children that evening under the juniper by the well. Tomorrow we hide, she said. All of you. No, said Bo, I can help. You will help, she said, by living. They didn't cry. They didn't argue again. Clara had earned their trust, and in that moment, they gave it. Before the sun rose, she led them to the cellar dug deep into the canyon's edge, masked by a stone wall and heavy brush. There, she left them with water, jars of beans, and blankets. When Ruthie clung to her skirts, Clara knelt and touched the girl's cheek. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is wait. The sun climbed, the land baked, and the gang came. Clara saw them first from the barn roof, just as Bo had. 6 men, lean and coiled, riding with a kind of arrogance bred from unchecked power. At their head, a man in a long duster and red bandana. He didn't look like a leader. He looked like a sickness that knew it had already spread. They stopped at the edge of her fence line, horses snorting in the dust. Red bandana called out, "This your land, ma'am?" She stepped into view, rifle slung casual as a broom. "It is. You here alone?" "I'm always alone," she said. A pause. "We heard this place was full of children." She shrugged. "You see any?" He grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You got food? Water? Shelter? Could be you'd share with tired men." Clara cocked her head. "Could be you'd ride on if you had any sense." The man's face darkened. He nodded to one of his riders. The younger outlaw dismounted, stepping toward the fence. That's when the first trap snapped, a steel claw biting his leg, dragging him hard to the earth. Chaos exploded. Horses reared. Dust kicked up. One man fired wild into the air. Clara dropped to one knee and steadied the rifle. Crack! The sound echoed like thunder rolling off canyon walls. She didn't aim to kill, only to cripple shoulder, thigh, wrist. The kind of shots that made men rethink their purpose. Another outlaw screamed, tripped by Caleb's wire snare, crashing face first into a thorn bush. The red bandana leader ducked behind a boulder, firing blindly, shouting curses. But Clara didn't move. She stepped forward slowly, rifle still smoking. "I warned you," she said, voice cutting clean through the noise. Red bandana's eyes locked on hers. Something shifted. Recognition. You're Ruth Corbin's girl." Clara's lips curled ever so slightly. "That's right." The silence that followed was thick and terrifying. The legend of Ruth Corbin, sharpshooter of the South Range, protector of miners, dead-eye preacher's daughter, still lingered in outlaw circles. And this was her daughter, walking upright, alone, daring thunder to strike again. The gang broke. Not with honor, not with pride. They ran like cattle from lightning. Clara stood there until the wind settled. Then she lowered the rifle. When she opened the cellar door, the children looked up, eyes wide. "Is it over?" Willow whispered. Clara nodded once. For now. Outside, ash from distant fires still drifted faintly across the ranch. But the only thunder left was the sound of small feet returning home. The land was quiet after the firestorms of men had passed. Not peaceful. Peace hadn't truly returned, but quiet like a wound freshly cleaned. Clara stood alone beside the well, sleeves rolled up, jaw firm, eyes on the horizon. Her face was wind-burned and sun-worn, but something new lived behind her gaze now. Not just defiance. Purpose. The children had returned to the house, hesitantly at first, like deer unsure if the storm had really ended. But by the second day, they were gathering eggs again. By the third, Caleb asked if he could fix the door. Bo kept the spyglass. Clara had begun planting. They started with onions, easy growers in bad soil, and beans near the fence. The work was slow, quiet, grounding. Each small green shoot was a declaration, "We're staying." At dusk, Clara would sit on the porch with her boots off, ankles sore and calloused, and watch the sun melt across the hills. Some nights, a child would join her. Not always the same one. Nokos rarely spoke, but when she did, she asked questions about the sky. Willa recited poems she half remembered from her mother's voice. Even Trace had begun to hum when he thought no one was listening. It was Bo who asked what no one else dared. "You gonna keep us forever?" Clara didn't look at him. She stared out at the land she had nearly died to defend. "I didn't take you in to borrow you," she said. "This isn't charity. This is your home." He swallowed hard. "So we're yours now." She finally turned, the edge of a smile barely surfacing. "You're not mine. You're your own. But you belong here, and I'll fight to keep it that way." That night, the house didn't feel so haunted. The boards still creaked, but they did so under the rhythm of life. No longer echoes. Now footsteps, laughter, even arguments over biscuits. But storms rarely pass without trailing clouds. Word of Clara's stand had spread. The tale twisted and grew in town. How one woman with a buffalo rifle turned away 6 armed men. How she faced down outlaws with nothing but grit and a glare. Some added details she never spoke. Others imagined things she'd never done. But every version agreed. Clara Jensen was no longer just the woman who got left behind. She was the one who stood. With fame came whispers. Then came riders. One arrived under the banner of the county. A tall man in a tan duster, boots polished too clean for the road. "You're housing orphans," he said as she poured him coffee in the kitchen. Clara didn't answer. "Legally speaking," he continued, "that puts you in murky territory. No formal adoptions. No church record. They eat. They sleep. They work. They live," she said. "Ain't that the point?" He took a sip. "You'll need papers eventually. Schools. Taxes. Someone might challenge custody." She leveled him with her gaze. "Someone like who?" He didn't answer, but the pause said enough. Later that night, as the children sat around the fire pit behind the barn, Clara unfolded old documents. Her parents' deed, her late husband's cattle ledger, a water rights certificate yellow with time. Isaiah watched from a distance before speaking. "Are they going to take us?" Clara looked up, her voice unwavering. "No, but we might have to prove why they can't." So the next days became filled with more than chores. She taught the older ones to read old contracts and to write their names with pride. She helped Caleb draw diagrams of the property and let Annie keep records of milk from the goats. They rehearsed answers to questions. How long they'd been there, how they contributed, who taught them to plow, read, sew. Bo practiced writing Bo Jensen in clean, slanted letters. Ruthie drew a house and wrote just one word under it, us. One day, weeks later, Clara rode into town with the children in tow. They wore their best, patched overalls, combed hair, clean hands. They stood in front of the church with Reverend Mathis, who knew hardship and love in equal measure. Clara stood before the town board, for graying men and one grim woman, and made her case with no lawyer, no legal jargon, just truth. "I was told I was empty," she said, "that I had nothing to offer. But I found something here. Not pity, not rescue, a reason." She looked back at the children, standing still as fence posts in the midday heat. These kids weren't strays. They're survivors, and now they're mine in every way that counts. If you want to write it down, fine. But don't you tell me this family needs permission to be real. Silence followed. Then the grim woman stood. "I was raised by a widow. No blood, just loyalty. Let it be noted, the Jensen children stay." The vote passed without another word. Clara rode home in silence. The children dozed in the back of the wagon, slumped against sacks of flour and bundles of cloth, donated by townsfolk, moved by her speech. The wind was soft that evening. The sun dipped low over the horizon, like it was bowing to them. As they reached the ranch, Willa stirred. "We're home." "Yes," Clara said. "We are." Inside, the house buzzed with new energy. Plans were made to build extra bunks. A second outhouse was marked out. Willa wanted to paint the walls. Nokos carved birds into the beams. Annie braided flowers into the window frames. Clara watched it unfold. She didn't direct. She allowed. That night, she sat alone on the porch once more. Except now Trace sat beside her. He said nothing for a long time, just swung his legs quietly as the stars came out. Then he spoke, his first full sentence since he'd arrived. "You weren't empty," he said. Clara didn't respond for a while, but her hand reached over and found his, resting gently. "No," she whispered. "I never was." And though the world outside would always carry storms and strangers, the house no longer echoed with loneliness. It rang with life. They came to call it Ash Hollow, not because of ruin, but because that's where the fire stopped. Time passed as it always did on the frontier, slow in minutes, fast in years. Seasons rolled through the ranch like chapters in a worn book. Spring brought wildflowers curling around the fence posts. Summers tested the soil. Winters came with brittle frost and stories by the hearth. But the tale of Clara Jensen, how one woman faced down outlaws with 8 children hidden in a canyon cave, never faded. It traveled on the wind, down river with traders, across the plains with drifters. It twisted like folklore, but it never lost its heart. People came to see her, some out of curiosity, others in search of something they couldn't name. A war widow arrived with a boy too quiet, and a letter she never opened. A former scout came with nothing but a map tattooed on his back, and a hunger for stillness. 2 sisters, runaways from a rail town, stepped off a mail cart with nothing but a basket and hope. And Clara said yes, not to all, but to those who truly needed the land more than she did. Ash Hollow became more than a ranch. It became a refuge. Bo grew taller than any of them expected. Strong, too, with a sharp eye for weather and a gift for listening to cattle. By 17, he ran the stock drives himself. When strangers came asking for the man of the place, they'd find Bo, quiet and steady, with Clara just behind him, grinning. Annie took to teaching. She turned the old hayloft into a schoolhouse, chalking letters on the beams and stringing up dried corn for counting games. Children came from neighboring homesteads, some riding in on donkeys, others barefoot across the plains. Nokos never stopped wandering the canyons. She became a tracker like her grandfather, teaching the younger children how to follow birds by feather pattern and read clouds like scripture. Sometimes she was gone for days, but she always came back, laughing like thunder in the distance. And Clara, well, she aged, of course. The lines in her face deepened, her hair silvered, but something in her only grew sharper. The land softened under her touch. Her hands told stories that words never did. Once, a passing newspaperman asked if he could write about her, the widow of Ash Hollow. She declined. "This place ain't built on me," she said. "It's built on what came after." One summer, long after the gang had vanished and the ranch had grown wide enough to host barn dances, a stranger rode in from the north. Not young, not old, the kind of man who looked like he'd run out of roads. He wore city clothes and polished boots. His eyes never left Clara as she stepped out of the house, wiping flour from her hands. "Clara Jensen?" he asked. She looked him over. "Used to be Clara Barnes. Then Clara Jensen. These days, I mostly go by Ma." The man hesitated. "You were married once. To a man named Paul Jensen." A pause. "Then I was." He nodded. "I'm his cousin. Heard about you. Figure it couldn't be true. Thought maybe I'd see for myself." Clara didn't move. "And what did you find?" He looked around, at the fence lines that didn't sag, the fields that didn't starve, the children hauling water without complaint. He saw Nokos showing a boy how to shape arrowheads with stone, Bo helping a limping calf to stand, Annie reading under the tree with 3 toddlers asleep in her lap. He took off his hat. "A legend." She smirked just a little. "No legends here. Just work." He chuckled, genuine. "Well, if you don't mind, I'll be on my way. You want a hot meal before you go?" He blinked. "You'd offer that? After everything?" Clara looked past him toward the hills, where the smoke had once risen. "Not everyone gets to choose who they come from," she said, "but everyone gets to choose who they feed." He ate that night at the long table, surrounded by children and stories. No one asked him to stay, but no one asked him to leave, either. Years later, when the railroad laid track closer to Ash Hollow, more people came. Some to trade, some to settle, a few just to meet her. Some even asked her to run for office. She refused. "I've got all the votes I need right here," she'd say, gesturing to the table full of muddy boots and loud laughter. And still the tale spread. How Clara Jensen stood alone with nothing but a rifle and nerve, how she became mother to the lost, how she built a place not of blood, but of belonging. Children who once thought silence was safer learned to sing. Wounds once thought permanent turned to scars, then faded. And the land remembered. It bore fruit. It held them. The final photograph taken of Clara hangs still in the main house, her frame weathered, hand strong, sitting beneath the archway of the barn. Around her, 5 grown children, 2 grandchildren, and a basket of eggs. She doesn't smile wide. Just enough. Just honest. In the background, etched into the barn beams by Annie's careful hand, are 4 words. Empty is no longer. And beneath that, someone had written smaller. She made a home from thunder. And so the legend of Ash Hollow lives, not in the violence that tried to claim it, but in the quiet victories of those who stood, stayed, and chose to love anyway.